As the days passed after the conference, I noticed subtle shifts in Linda's behavior. She was more engaged with her phone, often taking calls in another room or hastily silencing notifications when I entered. When I asked about her day, her responses grew vague, lacking the usual detail she eagerly shared before. I tried to push aside my growing concerns, chalking it up to her increased workload and the stress of managing new projects. Yet, the distance between us seemed to widen with each passing day. Our conversations became stilted, punctuated by awkward silences that spoke volumes. One evening, while tidying up the living room, I stumbled upon an unfamiliar business card tucked between the cushions of the couch. It bore Mark's name and contact information, a stark reminder of the connection I had witnessed at the conference. My heart sank as I realized the significance of this small, innocuous piece of paper. Confronting Linda seemed daunting, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that had taken root in my mind. That night, after putting our daughter to bed, I broached the subject carefully, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within me. "Linda, I found something today," I began hesitantly, holding up the business card. Her expression faltered for a moment before she composed herself, her features hardening imperceptibly. "It's just a professional connection, nothing more," she replied coolly, her tone defensive. "Mark and I discussed potential collaborations, that's all." Her words offered a plausible explanation, but her defensive stance only fueled my unease. I wanted to believe her, to trust that this was indeed innocent networking. But doubt gnawed at me relentlessly. Days turned into weeks, marked by strained dinners and sleepless nights spent wondering where our marriage was headed. Linda's absences grew more frequent, often attributed to urgent meetings or last-minute deadlines. Each excuse felt like another brick in the wall dividing us, driving a deeper wedge between the life we once shared and the uncertain future looming ahead. I found myself scrutinizing every detail, searching for clues I didn't want to find. A fleeting glance at her phone revealed a text message from Mark. Innocuous in content, yet laden with implications that sent a chill down my spine. The sinking feeling in my gut solidified into a painful certainty. I was losing Linda, bit by bit, to someone I never imagined would come between us. Desperate for answers, I confronted Linda again, my voice betraying the anguish I had long tried to conceal. "Are you having an affair?" The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating the space between us. She hesitated, her gaze faltering for the briefest moment before hardening into resolve. "I'm not having an affair," she insisted firmly, but her refusal lacked the conviction that could reassure me. Torn between wanting to believe her and the mounting evidence that whispered otherwise, I faced an agonizing choice. Trust the woman I loved despite my fears, or confront a reality that threatened to shatter everything I held dear. Little did I know, the truth would soon unveil itself, forcing me to confront the devastating consequences of betrayal and deception that would reshape our lives forever. As the conference days stretched on, Linda's absorption in Mark became more pronounced, casting a shadow over our interactions. Each morning started with her excited chatter about the day's agenda, inevitably including mentions of Mark, his insights, his ideas, and his presence in various sessions. Her enthusiasm for their potential collaborations was undeniable, but it came at the cost of our usual morning rituals, quiet moments over coffee, sharing plans for the day ahead. Throughout the day, as Linda attended sessions with renewed vigor, I found myself increasingly sidelined. She would sit beside Mark, their heads bent close as they discussed case studies and strategies, leaving me to occupy a distant chair or engage in stilted conversations with other attendees. Whenever Mark's name popped up in conversation or Linda received a text from him, a subtle shift in her demeanor was palpable, a quickened pulse, a faint blush that she tried unsuccessfully to conceal. During a midday break between sessions, I caught a glimpse of Linda and Mark deep in conversation at a secluded corner table. His animated gestures and her attentive nods painted a picture of two people engrossed in dialogue that transcended professional courtesy. It was a scene that left a bitter taste in my mouth, a sinking feeling in my gut that refused to dissipate. That evening, over dinner in the hotel restaurant, I broached the subject cautiously, hoping for a reassurance that never came. "You seem to really connect with Mark," I ventured, attempting to keep my tone neutral despite the turmoil raging within. Linda's smile faltered momentarily, her gaze flickering away before meeting mine again. "He's a valuable colleague," she replied lightly, though her eyes betrayed a hint of something more complex: uncertainty, guilt, or perhaps a burgeoning attraction she was reluctant to acknowledge. I nodded, masking the hurt that threatened to surface. But as the conference progressed, so did their camaraderie. Linda started mentioning Mark more frequently in our conversations, sharing anecdotes from their discussions and the insights he offered into social work practices. It was as though a new world had opened up for her, one where Mark played an increasingly central role. By the third day, it was evident to me, and perhaps to everyone around us, that Linda's bond with Mark had deepened beyond the professional realm. They shared inside jokes, exchanged knowing glances, and seemed to gravitate towards each other in crowded rooms. Their connection was undeniable, leaving me to grapple with a gnawing sense of dread and helplessness. As I watched from the sidelines, the woman I loved, whose passion for helping others had drawn me to her in the first place, was now navigating uncharted waters with another man. And I, her husband of a decade, felt like a distant observer in my own life, powerless to stop the inevitable drift that was pulling us apart. That night, as we retired to our hotel room once more, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the realization that our marriage was on the precipice of irrevocable change. Sleep eluded me, replaced by a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, confusion, and a sense of profound sadness at the prospect of losing the woman who had once been my anchor in a sea of uncertainty. As the conference wore on, Linda's burgeoning relationship with Mark became a relentless undercurrent in our days. What had begun innocuously as professional camaraderie had evolved into a friendship tinged with an intimacy that unsettled me deeply. During sessions, I frequently glimpsed them sitting side by side, engrossed in whispered conversations, or sharing amused glances that spoke of shared understanding. Linda's laughter, once reserved for our private moments, now flowed freely in Mark's presence, punctuating the air with a vitality that seemed to elude our own interactions. They seemed to possess a shorthand, finishing each other's sentences and exchanging knowing looks that left me feeling like an outsider to a private joke I couldn't comprehend. One pivotal evening, after a particularly stimulating panel discussion, Linda extended an invitation to Mark to join us for dinner. I masked my unease with a forced smile and a nod, trying to ignore the tightening knot of apprehension in my chest. Throughout the meal, they engaged in animated debates about social policies and shared personal anecdotes that hinted at a depth of connection I hadn't anticipated. I found myself increasingly relegated to the role of a silent observer, watching as Linda's attention, once wholly devoted to our relationship, now straddled the divide between Mark and me. Her laughter at his jokes cut through me with a pang of jealousy, while I struggled to conceal my discomfort as their conversation flowed effortlessly, leaving me to pick at my food with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Later that night, back in the confines of our hotel room, I could no longer contain my mounting concern. "Linda, I can't help but notice how close you've become with Mark," I began tentatively, my voice strained with apprehension. She sighed, her expression a mix of frustration and guilt. "John, he's just a colleague," she asserted, though her words lacked the conviction that could reassure me. "We share a passion for social work, and it's been refreshing to connect with someone who understands." I nodded in response, outwardly accepting her explanation while inwardly grappling with a torrent of doubt. Was their bond truly platonic, or had it evolved into something more profound? The way they looked at each other, the effortless ease of their conversations, these were not the interactions of mere professional acquaintances. In the subsequent days of the conference, Linda and Mark's friendship continued to deepen. They sought each other out during breaks, engrossed in discussions that spanned from professional challenges to personal aspirations. Linda's enthusiasm for her work seemed reinvigorated in Mark's presence, leaving me to wrestle with a tumult of emotions. jealousy at the closeness they shared, betrayal at feeling sidelined, and a desperate longing to reclaim the intimacy we had once cherished. As we packed our bags on the final day of the conference, the weight of impending change hung heavy in the air. Linda's growing bond with Mark had irreversibly altered the landscape of our marriage, leaving me adrift in uncertainty and grappling with the harsh reality that our once solid foundation was now cracked and fragile. Returning home from the conference, the tension between Linda and me hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to the changes that had taken root during those few days apart. Linda's demeanor, once vibrant and engaging, now seemed tinged with a quiet reserve that spoke volumes. Her mind often appeared elsewhere, drifting back to discussions with Mark and the ideas they had exchanged, leaving our interactions feeling hollow and strained. Desperate to reclaim a sense of normalcy, I suggested our usual morning coffees together and evening walks through our familiar neighborhood. Yet even these attempts to reconnect felt like going through the motions. Linda's laughter, which had once been a constant source of joy in our home, now seemed tempered, restrained by thoughts I couldn't fully grasp. She would often take phone calls in another room, her voice carrying a hint of secrecy, or respond to messages that arrived at odd hours, further fueling my unease. Caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, I wrestled with guilt for doubting Linda and questioning her dedication to our marriage. For a decade, she had been my unwavering pillar of support, the one who believed in me when I faltered, and who stood by my side through every triumph and setback. Yet now, her attention seemed divided, her thoughts drifting elsewhere even when we were together. Beneath the guilt, however, simmered a growing resentment and hurt. How could she cultivate such an intimate connection with another man, especially a colleague, while I, her husband, felt increasingly like an outsider in her life? The nights grew longer as I lay awake, replaying scenes from the conference in my mind, searching for clues to decipher the distance that had inexplicably grown between us. One evening, unable to contain my turmoil any longer, I broached the delicate subject over dinner. "Linda, I've noticed things seem different between us," I began tentatively, my voice betraying the mix of emotions swirling within me. She looked up, her expression a blend of surprise and guardedness. "Different how?" she asked, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of apprehension. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my words pressing down on me. "Since the conference you've seemed preoccupied, distant sometimes," I admitted, my voice growing softer with each confession. Linda sighed softly, her shoulders sagging almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry, John. Work has been overwhelming lately. There's so much to process from the conference, and Mark has been a supportive colleague," she explained, her tone tinged with unease. I nodded outwardly, though inwardly the doubts persisted like a relentless storm. Was it truly just work-related stress? Or had Linda's connection with Mark evolved into something deeper, a bond that threatened to eclipse our own? In the days that followed, I found myself scrutinizing Linda's every gesture and expression, yearning for glimpses of the woman whose smile had once illuminated our home with warmth and laughter. Yet each time she glanced at her phone with a trace of anticipation, or mentioned Mark's name with a fondness I couldn't dismiss, my heart sank a little further. I grappled with the stark reality that our marriage stood at a crossroads, torn between the comfort of familiarity and the allure of something new and exhilarating. Despite my attempts to suppress doubts and trust in Linda's love for me, the shadow of uncertainty loomed larger with each passing day, leaving me uncertain of what the future held for us and whether we could find our way back to each other. Weeks dragged by with an oppressive tension that clung to every corner of our home, despite my best efforts to bury my suspicions and cling desperately to the belief in our marriage. Linda's increasing closeness to Mark cast a dark and undeniable shadow over our once solid foundation. One evening, returning earlier than usual from work, I found Linda sitting at the kitchen table, her gaze fixed on her phone with a distant, troubled expression. The sudden sound of my footsteps startled her, and she quickly hid the screen from view, attempting to force a smile that couldn't quite reach her eyes. The air around us crackled with unspoken tension, heavy with the weight of unsaid words and growing distance. I busied myself with preparing dinner, trying to fill the silence with mundane tasks, while my mind raced with unanswered questions. Was she exchanging messages with Mark? Had their interactions crossed a line that I wasn't ready to confront? Later that night, after we had put our children to bed, I heard the soft chime of Linda's phone signaling a message. I watched as she glanced at it briefly before excusing herself under the guise of checking work emails in our home office. Unable to ignore the knot of unease tightening in my chest, I followed her quietly. Peering through a crack in the door, I observed as Linda became absorbed in a text conversation with Mark. The messages, innocuous on the surface, carried an undercurrent of intimacy that struck me like a blow to the gut. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their exchange, each word carving deeper into my heart. They reminisced about shared moments from the conference, exchanged inside jokes that excluded me, and made plans to meet for coffee under the pretense of discussing a new project. The reality hit me like a sledgehammer. I had been blind to the emotional affair blossoming between Linda and Mark. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They had become confidants, sharing a connection that surpassed the boundaries of our marriage. That night, sleep evaded me as I confronted Linda with the evidence I had uncovered. She recoiled, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and guilt as I laid bare the messages that exposed our shattered trust. Her initial denial crumbled under the weight of undeniable proof, and tearfully, she confessed to the depth of her emotional entanglement with Mark. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she pleaded, her voice trembling with remorse. "It just evolved. I didn't realize how deep it had gotten until now." Standing there, my heart breaking with each word, I struggled to process the enormity of her betrayal. The woman I had loved and trusted had opened herself, her thoughts, her laughter, her vulnerabilities, to another man, leaving our marriage fractured and irreparable. In that agonizing moment, as I faced Linda's tear-streaked face reflecting my own anguish, I knew our journey together had veered into uncharted territory. The bond we had nurtured over a decade had been shattered by a single lapse in judgment, and the road ahead stretched dauntingly uncertain. Turning away, grappling with the devastation of her betrayal, I understood with painful clarity that our marriage could never be the same. The intimacy Linda had shared with Mark had irreversibly altered the course of our lives, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of our shattered trust alone. In the days following the revelation of Linda's emotional affair with Mark, our home became a battleground of unspoken tension and shattered trust. Every interaction between us was strained, filled with a palpable sense of betrayal that hung heavy in the air. Linda, consumed by guilt and remorse, retreated into herself. Where once her presence had filled our home with warmth and laughter, now there was a hollow emptiness that echoed with the absence of shared intimacy and trust. She avoided my gaze, busying herself with tasks around the house or burying her face in work emails that offered a convenient escape from our fractured reality. I too withdrew into a shell of silent anguish. The image of Linda and Mark's intimate exchanges haunted me, replaying in my mind like a cruel loop of betrayal. Each time Linda's phone buzzed with a message, my heart clenched with a mix of dread and resentment. Had their emotional connection evolved into something more physical? I found myself scrutinizing every detail of Linda's behavior, her sudden interest in her appearance, the secretive glances at her phone, the unexplained late nights at work. Each small deviation from our normal routine fueled my suspicions, feeding a growing sense of paranoia that threatened to consume me. One evening, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, I confronted Linda once more. "Where were you last night?" I asked tersely, my voice tinged with accusation. She looked up, startled by the sudden intensity of my question. "I had to stay late at the office," she replied quietly, her eyes avoiding mine. The excuse sounded rehearsed, too polished to be sincere. "Is that all it was?" I pressed, unable to mask the bitterness in my voice. Linda sighed, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "John, please. I told you, I'm trying to make things right," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. But her words fell on deaf ears. The trust that once anchored our marriage had been shattered beyond repair, replaced by a toxic mix of doubt and resentment. I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda's affair with Mark had irreparably changed her, casting a shadow over the life we had built together. As days turned into weeks, Linda's distance grew more pronounced. She withdrew further into herself, seeking solace in work commitments that kept her away from home for longer hours. The laughter that once echoed through our halls was replaced by an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the occasional tense exchange or awkward attempt at reconciliation. I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger at Linda's betrayal, sorrow for the loss of the woman I had loved, and a gnawing sense of inadequacy that gnawed at my self-worth. Had I failed her as a husband? Could I have done more to prevent this unraveling of our marriage? But amid the turmoil, one thing became painfully clear: Linda's emotional affair with Mark had shattered the foundation of trust that our marriage had been built upon. And as much as I yearned to reclaim the closeness we had once shared, I knew that the wounds inflicted by her betrayal ran too deep to heal. The tension in our home had reached a breaking point, an oppressive weight that hung between Linda and me like an unspoken accusation. Days melted into weeks, each passing moment marked by a brittle silence that underscored the irreparable damage wrought by Linda's betrayal. One evening, as we sat in the dimly lit living room, the air heavy with unspoken words, I could no longer ignore the gnawing suspicion that Linda's affair with Mark had extended beyond emotional intimacy. The late nights at work, the guarded conversations, the subtle changes in her demeanor, all pointed to a truth I was reluctant to confront. "Linda," I began, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anguish. "Is there more between you and Mark?" She looked up, her eyes widening with a flicker of alarm. "John, please," she started, her voice trailing off as she struggled to find the right words. I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've seen the way you look at him, the way you talk about him," I continued, my voice thick with accusation. "Tell me the truth, Linda. Has something happened between you two?" For a moment she hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands folded tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," she admitted, her admission hanging in the air like a death knell. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. "How long?" I managed to choke out, my voice thick with pain. Linda swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with tears. It started at the conference," she confessed, her voice wavering. We grew close, and one thing led to another. Her admission sent shockwaves through me, shattering the last vestiges of denial I had clung to. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, had shared herself with another man, violating the sanctity of our marriage in ways I couldn't comprehend. Anger and hurt surged through me in equal measure. "How could you do this to us?" I demanded, my voice rising with a mix of anguish and betrayal. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Linda flinched, her shoulders trembling with the weight of guilt. "I'm so sorry, John," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I never meant for any of this to happen. It got out of control." Shook my head, struggling to process the magnitude of her betrayal. "Out of control?" I repeated bitterly. "You made a choice, Linda. You chose him over us." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the raw ache of shattered trust and the bitter realization that our marriage had been irreparably damaged. The woman who had once been my confidant, my partner in life, now stood before me as a stranger, a painful reminder of the love we had lost. As I turned away from her, unable to bear the weight of her confession any longer, I knew that our journey together had come to an agonizing crossroads. Linda's affair with Mark had torn apart the fabric of our marriage, leaving us both adrift in a sea of regret and unspoken remorse. The foundation of trust upon which our life together had been built lay shattered, and the path forward seemed daunting and uncertain. In the days that followed, we navigated the wreckage of our relationship with heavy hearts and weary spirits. Linda's tearful apologies and promises of regret rang hollow against the backdrop of my wounded pride and broken trust. I struggled to reconcile the woman I had loved with the one who had betrayed me, torn between a desire to salvage what remained and the painful realization that some wounds could never fully heal. The once familiar routines of our life together felt like empty rituals, each moment tinged with the bitter taste of betrayal. The laughter that had once echoed through our home now seemed distant and hollow, replaced by a haunting silence that echoed the depths of our fractured bond. Despite my anguish, I clung to a fragile thread of hope that perhaps with time and effort we could rebuild what had been lost. Yet beneath the surface, the scars of Linda's infidelity ran deep, leaving me to wonder if our marriage could ever truly recover from the wounds inflicted by her betrayal. As I wrestled with my emotions in the solitude of sleepless nights, I grappled with the agonizing choice before me. Whether to fight for the shattered remnants of our love or to walk away, leaving behind the ashes of a marriage irreparably broken by betrayal and regret. In the aftermath of our confrontation, the once vibrant air in our home had grown thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate any attempt at normalcy. Linda, who had always been the anchor of our family, now retreated further into herself, finding solace in the demanding hours of her job and the distracting hum of her phone. Nights that were once filled with shared dreams and quiet conversations had turned into separate rituals of solitude and unanswered questions. Desperate for clarity amidst the emotional debris, I gathered the courage to confront Linda once more, my voice trembling with a mix of heartbreak and a fervent need for truth that burned deep within me. "Linda," I began, the words heavy with the weight of our shattered trust, "how could you do this to us?" She looked up, her eyes betraying a complex mix of emotions, pain, guilt, and a trace of defiance that flickered and faded like a distant flame. "John, please," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think. It's just work-related stress." Her attempt to explain cut through me like a jagged blade, disbelief mingling with a simmering anger that threatened to consume all reason. "Work-related stress?" I repeated incredulously, struggling to contain the flood of emotions rising within me. "Is that what you call it? What about the late nights, the secret conversations?" Linda's shoulders slumped, tears welling in her eyes as she searched for words to bridge the chasm that had widened between us. "I swear, John, nothing physical happened between us," she insisted, her voice trembling with the weight of unspoken guilt. "It was just emotional support. Mark understood what I was going through at work, and I let it go too far." I scoffed bitterly, unable to mask the raw pain that gnawed at my heart. "Emotional support?" I retorted, my voice thick with bitterness. "Is that supposed to justify what you did? Do you even realize the damage you've caused?" Her silence was deafening, a stark admission of the deep wounds her actions had inflicted upon our marriage. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice cracking with remorse. I was confused, lost, and Mark was there. The weight of her confession hung heavy in the space between us, laden with a crushing sense of betrayal and the shattered remnants of trust that had once bound us together. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted finally, the weight of her betrayal crushing any semblance of hope for immediate reconciliation. Linda's tears fell freely now, her body trembling with the weight of her own guilt and the magnitude of the consequences. "I understand," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the suffocating silence that had enveloped us like a shroud. As I turned away, the enormity of the shattered fragments of our marriage lay bare before me, a daunting maze of pain and uncertainty that stretched out into an uncertain future. Linda's refusal to fully acknowledge the severity of her emotional affair with Mark left me grappling with a profound sense of loss. A loss not only of the marriage we had once cherished, but of the trust and intimacy that had defined our shared life together. In the days that followed, we navigated the fragile truce of coexistence under the same roof, each moment a delicate balance between lingering resentment and a flickering hope for eventual healing. I struggled to reconcile the woman I had loved with the one who had betrayed my trust. Linda's insistence on downplaying the gravity of her actions left me grappling with a profound sense of grief. Grief for the dreams we had nurtured together, and for the uncertain path that now lay ahead. But amidst the wreckage of our shattered trust, a flicker of determination took root within me. Whether we could salvage our marriage remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: Linda's betrayal had irrevocably changed the landscape of our lives, leaving us both to grapple with the consequences of her actions and the daunting task of rebuilding what had been broken. In the wake of Linda's tearful insistence that her relationship with Mark was purely professional, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. While her words offered a sliver of hope that our marriage might somehow recover from the betrayal, the lingering doubts and unanswered questions gnawed at my resolve. Unable to shake the feeling that there was more to Linda's connection with Mark than she was willing to admit, I embarked on a clandestine mission to uncover the truth. Late nights spent awake, scrolling through Linda's phone under the guise of checking the time, revealed cryptic messages and deleted conversations that hinted at a deeper intimacy than she had acknowledged. Each discovery, from exchanged emojis that spoke volumes to veiled references to shared memories, fueled my growing suspicion that Linda's affair with Mark was far from innocent. The realization of her deception cut me to the core, leaving me grappling with a profound sense of betrayal that threatened to unravel the fragile remnants of trust between us. Confronted with the evidence of Linda's emotional entanglement with Mark, I wrestled with a dilemma that tore at my conscience. Should I confront her again, armed with irrefutable proof of her infidelity? Or should I continue to gather information, clinging to the desperate hope that there might be a way to salvage our shattered marriage? Days turned into weeks as I navigated the treacherous terrain of suspicion and heartache. Linda, oblivious to my clandestine investigation, attempted to mend the rift between us with half-hearted apologies and fleeting gestures of affection that rang hollow in the face of her betrayal. One evening, as Linda retired early to bed, exhaustion and anguish etched into the lines of her face, I found myself standing at a crossroads of my own making. With Linda's phone clutched tightly in my hand, I scrolled through the incriminating messages once more, steeling myself for the painful confrontation that lay ahead. In the stillness of our darkened bedroom, illuminated only by the faint glow of the screen, I made a decision that would forever alter the course of our marriage. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with sorrow, I confronted Linda with the undeniable proof of her emotional affair with Mark. Her reaction was a mix of shock and despair, her tearful protests crumbling under the weight of incontrovertible evidence. "John, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling with remorse. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I was confused, lost. But her words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the deafening roar of betrayal and heartache that reverberated through our shattered marriage. At that moment, as Linda's tear-stained face mirrored my own anguish, I knew that our journey together had reached a painful crossroads from which there could be no turning back. As I turned away from her, consumed by the devastating reality of her infidelity, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty and pain. Linda's emotional affair with Mark had shattered the fragile trust that bound us together, leaving me to grapple with the profound sense of loss and disillusionment that engulfed our marriage in its wake. Days stretched into agonizing weeks as we navigated the aftermath of betrayal. The once familiar rhythms of our life together were replaced by awkward silences and restless nights haunted by unspoken accusations. Counseling sessions became battlegrounds where words of forgiveness clashed with the bitter taste of betrayal that lingered between us. Linda's attempts at reconciliation were met with my guarded skepticism, her promises of transparency overshadowed by the relentless echo of her emotional infidelity. Each attempt to bridge the chasm between us felt like tiptoeing on fragile ice, unsure if it would hold or crack beneath our feet. Outside our fractured world, time marched on relentlessly. Friends and family offered well-intentioned advice, urging forgiveness or advocating separation, their voices a chorus of conflicting opinions that added to the cacophony of our inner turmoil. But their well-meaning counsel couldn't penetrate the thick walls of hurt and betrayal that surrounded us. In the quiet moments of solitude, I wrestled with the overwhelming weight of disappointment and disillusionment. How had our once solid foundation crumbled so swiftly under the weight of Linda's emotional betrayal? The ache of betrayal gnawed at my heart, its tendrils reaching into every corner of our fractured relationship. Yet amidst the pain, a stubborn flicker of hope refused to be extinguished. Buried beneath layers of hurt and resentment, it whispered of the possibility of redemption, of a future where trust could be rebuilt from the ashes of broken promises. And so we navigated the turbulent waters of our shattered marriage, clinging to fragile fragments of hope as we searched for solid ground amidst the wreckage. Linda's tears were a constant reminder of the pain she had caused, yet her unwavering determination to make amends offered a glimmer of light in the darkness of our shared betrayal. As we struggled to find our footing in the aftermath of Linda's emotional affair, I grappled with the realization that forgiveness was not a destination, but a journey fraught with pitfalls and setbacks. Trust, once shattered, could not be easily pieced back together, and the road ahead would be paved with challenges and uncertainties. Yet amidst the wreckage of our fractured marriage, love refused to be silenced. It whispered of second chances and the possibility of redemption, urging us to confront our deepest fears and insecurities. In the quiet moments of introspection, I clung to the fragile hope that, together, we could rebuild what had been broken and forge a new path forward. But the scars of Linda's emotional betrayal ran deep, their presence a constant reminder of the fragility of our shared bond. Each step towards reconciliation felt like navigating a minefield of unspoken resentments and buried hurts, yet we pressed forward, determined to find healing amidst the wreckage of our shattered trust. As the days turned into weeks and months, our journey through the aftermath of Linda's emotional affair became a testament to the resilience of love in the face of adversity. We stumbled and faltered along the way, yet the flicker of hope that burned within us refused to be extinguished. In the quiet moments of reconciliation, we found solace in the shared understanding that forgiveness was a choice, not a given. Linda's tears spoke of remorse and regret. Yet her actions spoke louder than words as she sought to rebuild what had been lost amidst the wreckage of her emotional betrayal. And so we forged ahead, bruised but not broken. Our journey through the aftermath of Linda's emotional affair a testament to the strength of love in the face of betrayal. As we navigated the uncertain terrain of forgiveness and healing, I clung to the fragile hope that, someday, our shattered hearts would find solace in the mending of our fractured trust. As I stood there facing Linda with the weight of her betrayal heavy on my heart, I knew that this moment marked the end of the life we had built together. The evidence of her emotional affair with Mark lay bare before us, a stark reminder of the trust she had shattered and the love she had forsaken. "Linda," I began, my voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and anger. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, her expression a mosaic of regret and remorse. "John, please," she pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. "I'm so sorry, I never meant to hurt you." Her words echoed hollowly in the silence that stretched between us, devoid of the comfort they once offered. "I trusted you," I whispered hoarsely, struggling to contain the raw pain that threatened to consume me. "I trusted you with my heart, with our marriage." Linda's tears fell unabated now, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her own guilt. "I know," she choked out, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." For a moment we stood there, two souls adrift in the wreckage of a love that had once been unshakable. The distance between us, once bridged by laughter and shared dreams, now stretched impossibly wide, a chasm of broken promises and irreparable loss. "I can't stay," I finally managed to say, my voice steadier now, despite the turmoil raging inside me. "Not like this," Linda nodded, her gaze falling to the floor as she struggled to find the right words. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crushing weight of our shattered marriage. With one last lingering look, I turned away from her, the echo of her tearful apologies ringing in my ears. As I walked out the door, leaving behind the life we had once shared, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult and uncertain. Days turned into weeks as I grappled with the aftermath of Linda's betrayal. The once familiar routines of our life together felt like distant memories, overshadowed by the gaping wound of her infidelity. I sought solace in long walks and solitary evenings, trying to make sense of the shattered pieces of my heart. Friends and family offered words of comfort and support, their well-meaning gestures a lifeline in the storm of my emotions. Yet amidst their kindness, a profound sense of loneliness settled over me like a heavy fog. The ache of betrayal gnawed at my soul, its presence a constant reminder of the love I had lost. In the quiet solitude of sleepless nights, I replayed our last moments together, searching for answers in the fragments of our shattered marriage. Linda's tear-stained face haunted my dreams, her pleas for forgiveness echoing in the cavernous emptiness of my heart. I immersed myself in work, throwing myself into projects and deadlines in a futile attempt to escape the pain. But no matter how busy I kept myself, Linda's betrayal lingered like a shadow, casting doubt on the foundation of trust I had once believed unbreakable. Weeks turned into months as I navigated the unpredictable currents of grief and healing. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild my life without Linda. I found solace in the support of friends who stood by me through the darkest days, their unwavering loyalty a testament to the strength of genuine companionship. Therapy became my refuge, a safe space where I could unravel the tangled emotions that threatened to consume me. With each session, I unearthed buried pain and unresolved anger, confronting the depths of my betrayal with newfound clarity. As time passed, the sharp edges of my hurt began to soften. I embraced new hobbies and interests, rediscovering parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the wreckage of my failed marriage. The journey toward healing was slow and arduous, but with each small step forward, I reclaimed a sense of purpose and self-worth. In the quiet moments of reflection, I found peace in the realization that Linda's betrayal had not defined me. I had emerged from the crucible of heartache stronger and more resilient, determined to forge a future built on honesty and integrity. Though scars remained, they served as reminders of my capacity for forgiveness and resilience. I no longer mourned the loss of what could have been with Linda. Instead, I embraced the possibilities of a life enriched by hard-earned lessons and newfound wisdom. And as I stood at the threshold of a new beginning, I knew that the road ahead held infinite possibilities. Linda's betrayal had been a devastating chapter in my life, but it was not the end of my story. With courage and perseverance, I embraced the promise of a brighter tomorrow, guided by the enduring strength of my own resilience.